I'm Alex Anderson, and this is the Earn and Invest podcast.
We talk on the show all the time about numbers, how we earn and invest enough money to get to financial independence. But the point is what we do afterwards, how we use this newfound power to do the things we want to do, become the people we want to be, and create what we want to create in the world. Well, what if we could do all those things before we were financially independent? What if we could live like that today? Although many people think this is impossible, there's one group of people who consistently love to work as opposed to work to live. I'm talking artists. So today we're going to chat with a filmmaker about his recent film. While we will focus more on his creation and the fascinating topic it touches upon, there may be some discussion of the financial aspects of filmmaking at the end, but this will not be an episode about money. Alex Anderson was born in Massachusetts and raised in rural Vermont. After graduating from Queen's University in Kingston, Ontario, Alex moved to New York City to pursue a career in stand-up. Alex moved to New York City to pursue a career in stand-up comedy, which he did on a nightly basis for 5 years. His first feature film, Timing, came out on Prime Video in 2020 to surprise acclaim. His new film, Fog, delves into the complex and often painful dynamic of a mother-daughter relationship where the daughter comes to the realization that her mother might be a narcissist. This realization forces her to consider the difficult decision of going no contact to escape the toxic relationship. Fog is available now on Tubi. Alex Anderson, welcome to Earn and Invest. Let me ask you a real basic question. You came up as a comedian. What is a comedian doing writing such an unfunny movie? No, don't take that the wrong way, okay? I mean, there were
No,
some cute moments, there were some funny moments, but this is a serious topic. How did you get here?
that's a great question. Yeah, I mean, I thought when we started off on the journey, when I started writing it, the movie kind of became heavier and heavier as we moved through the process. I thought I was making something more along the lines of Garden State at the beginning. I don't know if you're familiar with them, but it's got, it has drama, it has comedy, it's a little bit lighter. Um, as the subject matter evolved, it just got heavier and heavier and yeah, I don't know. It just kind of the universe kind of unfolds in a way you're not expecting, and that's kind of the answer. It's like this is what the movie evolved to, you know. Yeah, that's what the movie evolved to, if that makes sense.
The movie centers around this idea of estrangement. Studies show that we're seeing more and more estrangement in the US. What I'm talking about is people who no longer talk to close family members. Is this something you've experienced in your real life, or how did you end up on this subject?
It's not something I've experienced in my real life. I have had friends of mine come in. I mean, I should tell you the initial impetus for the idea did come from the comedy background. And this kind of got lost in the movie. But the initial kernel of the idea was, where does comedy come from? Right? That idea, and the idea of, for some reason, when I would go home, and I have a good relationship with my parents, but it would just bring up, we all as families have our stuff, and for some reason I was like, I'm much funnier at home, and like I'm writing much better when I'm at home. And so the idea started from, it initially started from like a writer who has a difficult relationship with her mother, and she has a script that's due, so she purposely goes home to try and spark, she has writer's block, and she's going home to kind of stir something up, right? And so that was the initial kernel of the idea. I also, I remember having a conversation, I remember having a conversation with a girlfriend of mine, like just a friend, and she was telling me something horrible about that her mother had just done. And she
Hmm.
was like, this is done, we're done. This is not, this is it, blah, blah. And then I remember, like, a couple months after that, seeing like pictures of her on social media with her mom having a nice beach day, and it just kind of like got the brain going of like specifically mother. It's just very complex, and when you get into some of these details and you start, that's kind of what got me going down this rabbit hole. And then as you're reading, you're reading about people's experiences specifically with this, and I learned about the concept of fog, which stands for fear, obligation, guilt. And I read something that like the children of alcoholics have no problem hating their parents. They just are like, it's very clear cut for them, like they were awful and I don't want them in there, and they have no guilt. Whereas these kids who were abused by their parents also had this crazy mental warfare on them, and so they like they had this horrible experience, but they feel guilty and think that they should have like gratitude, and that, as I went down this rabbit hole, that became very interesting to explore.
I love
That's
the fact that when you were talking about the title, you talked about almost this war in their head. I had never heard the term fear, obligation, guilt. And I was sitting there, questioning why did he call this fog? And this is something that all creators know. Your baby is yours until you release it into the world. Once it's in the world, it's for everyone else to interpret, consume, and draw what they want from it. So you kind of lose control. And so I was thinking, what did that mean to me? And as I was thinking about this title, Fog, I thought about the fog of war. And I'm like, why does this connect with me? So I actually went and looked it up. And the definition, at least that I found of fog, is the term seeks to capture the uncertainty regarding one's own capability, adversary's capability, and adversary's intent during an engagement. And I felt a lot of that throughout the movie. Tell me about the acronym FOG, fear, obligation, guilt. Is that something that's used in these communities?
Yes, yes. So there's a website that I found called Out of the Fog. And they explain, and it's one of the terms, it's one of the basic terms, because you have, these a lot of these adult kids, they are not in reality of what the relationship really is, right? And the initial title was actually Fear, Obligation, Guilt, because
Hmm.
that's their core relationship with the parent. Is they and it's kind of how they control, right? And yeah, it's through fear, it's through obligation. Like, I did this for you, you have to do this for me. Guilt, like I'm getting old, where it's used as a method of control. And I do want to say I have empathy for the people who are suffering from these personality disorders as well. It's usually a response to deep, deep trauma, as a child, and it's and they have this deep, deep rooted fear of abandonment. That's kind of their core emotion, and yeah, and so and it's this crazy thing where they don't want people to leave them, but it's like all they do is antagonize and push, push, push the people that they love and care about the most. And then you have these kids who are then adults who they are not into, like, they hate these people, but they feel guilty for that. And if they told you just the reasons why, it would be like, yeah, of course you hate this person. Of course you hate going home. They say the worst things to you. They've been physically abusive towards you. You've been abused your whole life, and they're in the fog. They don't, they don't see the situation for what it is.
I like the fact that you brought up that a lot of times these people with the mental and psychological problems are reacting to what they grew up, right? What we're talking about here is generational trauma. And in fact, this whole idea behind the no
Yes.
contact letter, in a sense, is this ability to try to break generational trauma, right? In a very drastic way. I'm going to break off contact. Otherwise, I'm going to become what I most fear, which is exactly like my mother. You started the movie with Jane, the main character, reading her proposed no contact letter. Why did you start that way?
I wanted, so it wasn't I had that as a backup. That's a great question. I actually we shot a different opening, right? Because the big question I had, I didn't know how, I didn't know how much I wanted to explicitly set things up, right? And so things, the first time we shot the scene, it was just the first opening that we had was just a little bit less. It was the lead Jane was a little bit more confused, maybe a little bit newer into therapy, and was still unsure. um but I had in the back of my mind, if this movie isn't going to be set up properly, I'll film a scene with the therapist, and we'll start with the letter. We'll set it up, and then when I had the cut, the letter wasn't really set up enough, right? And so we did, there was also that middle point where she like looks at the letter, and then looks at the house. That was also just to kind of remind, the just to kind of keep that in there. And so yeah, we set the letter up right away, like let's be a little more clear of what this relationship is, so the audience isn't confused. We can see exactly, Jane basically sets up, you kind of know going into it, where she is at initially in her head, like, and just you can kind of see what happens from there. And so yeah, that was literally the last scene we shot after we had shot the bulk of the movie.
Let's talk about empathy a little bit. The main character, Jane, I found myself not liking her, especially in the beginning. Um, in fact, I found myself not liking many of the characters in different ways. And the one who I kind of partially connected to, at least in the beginning, was the mother. Was that purposeful? I mean, did you want Jane to be someone we could latch onto right away and say, I'm there with you?
That was purpose. No, I mean, that was one of the things that the lead actor Amanda Van Nostrand, who played Jane, that was one of the things she liked best about the script, was that we weren't trying to make Jane
Yeah,
likable.
she's flawed. I mean, she's flawed, no question.
Flawed. She's flawed. And listen, human beings are flawed. And there are going to be people who don't, hopefully, I mean, look, we didn't want to make her likable and make her empathetic. We didn't care. We just wanted, we were more going for honesty and truth. And this character is, listen, this character is still newly in therapy, and going through everything. I mean, she's also, she's grieving her father. She's not in a great time in her life, and so yeah, we didn't want to set things up. We like that she could be unlikable, and hopefully by the end of the movie, you are a little more empathetic for Jane and a little more understanding of where she's coming from. Yeah,
The setup of the movie, because we haven't gone deep into it, but Jane is going home to help her mom and her brother disperse the ashes and trying to work through, at least with a therapist, this trip is coming. I have a deadline and a pilot I'm supposed to be writing, and I have horrible writer's block. And B, this is going to be a big emotional shit show when I get home and have to deal with my family and a lot of these underlying issues and problems. We talked about this idea that originally, when you began this process, and we all know, anyone who's a creator knows that what they end with is not necessarily always what they begin with, but there was a lot more focus on some of the comedy of the situation and her having this writer's block and trying to get this pilot down. And in fact, one of the pieces of the story for me was this dealing with the stress and anxiety and worry about her actually doing her job, writing this pilot on a deadline, and how that intertwined with this horribly stressful situation of going home. What role did you think for us, the listener, what was your intent with the plot line about the pilot and kind of the stress around getting it done? How does that interplay with kind of her stress about her family and this idea whether to go no contact or not?
So I I kind of uh I mean, like I said before, it was kind of the initial kernel of the entire idea before even the no contact entered it. To be on, that the no contact came in a little bit later. Once the script, once I was already starting writing and kind of going, doing research, reading books. But yeah, the initial kernel of the idea was, and I wanted to, with a low, you have to make decisions when with budget and time and what you
Yeah.
can do. I did want to make this a little bit more of a love letter to comedy. I wanted her and the Adam character to talk a little bit more about the love they had in common, and when her childhood bedroom to have like all the pictures of her comedy heroes that she grew up and all these things. And truth be told, we just didn't have the money to like just another element to be done on everything of this love letter. And it ended up not being what the movie was about anyways, but that was something lost with the original intention, was just this love letter to comedy. And yeah, and you also do need I mean, truthfully, if she was, you do need some sort of reason for her to be home for the weekend, just in terms of
Yeah,
just
it
logistic.
logistically it plays in well to eventually what happens in the show, right? So the plot line definitely serves its purpose as we
Yes.
get further and further.
Yes.
But interestingly, I did find myself having some anxiety, like, why won't she just write the like
Yes.
I was
Yes.
definitely feeling that. So as I was saying, like Jane, in some ways, at least when we begin, we don't have a huge amount of empathy for her. We see her flaws right from the start. What we don't see from the start, we hear a touch about, but are the flaws of her mother, who's characterized from the beginning, from the no contact letter, as a narcissist. This is obviously someone toxic. And then we meet her in person, and she's kind of sweet and kind of doting. And
Yes.
Jane's best friend loves her. And
Yes.
were we supposed to, in a sense, like the mother more than we like Jane in the beginning?
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Great. Yeah. Because I want the audience to feel the confusion. What's going on. You're not meant to be on Jane's side. You're meant, and again, we did spell it out a little bit more by shooting that last scene with the therapist, but I wanted the entire, I don't think this is what the movie is, but there's almost like a slow burn thriller element to it, where you're not entirely sure what's going on. And to be honest, for some people nothing happens, but then for other people that have experienced this, these tiny little things are like wait, I don't have to put dishes in the sink, I can just leave dishes in the sink. Like, that's, to someone who hasn't experienced it, that's nothing, but her response to it tells you everything. Like, her shock is like, yeah, she's shocked like that, yeah.
It was funny because having family members who've gone through this, I was very attuned to the nuance of the things the mother said and how she said them, and then specifically Jane's reaction, right? Because there is the being on guard constantly for the
Yes.
slight, and then there's the gentle passive aggressiveness brought into the mother, especially in the beginning. That really hit home because I'm like, I've seen and experienced both sides of that before. One character we haven't really mentioned yet is Jane's brother. And this again comes more from maybe my personal experience, but I think it relates a little bit. And you were very, very careful with your role and the brother. But I thought there were some themes of loyalty going on there. And talk to me about the role the brother played. And specifically, was there a connection to loyalty? Because anyone who's gone through this knows that, especially in these families with lots of trauma, there's very much this theme of loyalty. You're either with us or against us. And I feel like the brother was very much
100%.
with the mother, even though he saw that something was wrong.
100%. You nailed it. That I specifically wanted that character. I mean, that represents the generational trauma, right? And that's how things, loyalty, love, family's the most important, that's how these actions, for that character, that's how these actions can just be continued with no consequences, and the brother has witnessed everything and knows everything and is not in the dark, but is not deep down, like, doesn't see anything wrong with it, has been conditioned that that is normal, has been conditioned that being treated that way and for these things to be happening is fine. And I wanted that to be shown, but also still loves his sister and wants that relationship, and they have a beautiful relationship. And so I want, just, yeah, that the brother is just such a key element to showing this story and illustrating, Yeah.
Alex Anderson was born in Massachusetts and raised in rural Vermont. After graduating from Queen's University in Kingston, Ontario, Alex moved to New York City to pursue a career in stand-up comedy, which he did on a nightly basis for 5 years. His first feature film, Timing, came out on Prime Video in 2020, and we are discussing today his new film, Fog. We're going to take a short break. I'm Doc G, and this is the Earn and Invest podcast. All right, I'm going to read us back in a moment. Any problems, issues, anything
No,
before we jump back
no,
in?
great, great, great.
All right. Let me just see where I want to start back. Okay. We are back on three, two, one. We are back with Alex Anderson. His new film, Fog, delves into the complex and often painful dynamic of a mother daughter relationship where the daughter comes to the realization that her mother might be a narcissist. This realization forces her to consider the difficult decision of going no contact to escape the toxic relationship. Fog is now available on Tubi. Let's talk about no contact. After watching this film, appropriately so, I felt the answer was still unclear. Did you feel while making this, especially as you got towards the ending, that you were going to be giving people a tool to decide one way or another?
I don't know, like, for the audience to decide what ends up happening.
Or no, 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 for themselves. So they're going to be people who watch this
Yeah,
specifically who kind of
yeah,
know this covers something that I am experiencing in my life, looking for answers, looking for clarity of
yeah,
how to manage maybe a narcissist in their own life.
yeah.
Do you think the movie's going to sway them one way or another?
I don't, I think everyone has to make their own decision on stuff. I would say, I'll say this. I didn't make this with the intention of their causing a cascade of no contact, if that makes sense. I didn't, I would absolutely, and I don't know if that's all we, there's a book, and I'm blanking on the name. I can send it to you, but one of the books I read for Reese, I think it's called "It's Not You, It's Your Mother" or something like. And the author was great, and there's, with these situations, what's tricky is there's no winning with the outcome, right? And no contact is not necessarily winning. It's there's only bad options here. It's, you either pretend nothing is wrong, you're either the brother, or you can do like some sort of low contact, which is like boundaried and just a little bit, which is, you're not having a full relationship with a parent, or you go no contact. The person's never going to change. That's it. That very, very rarely, when I'm reading about it, do people, not that they can't get help. And we're talking, we're not talking a light case of either narcissism or borderline. We're talking someone who has all the symptoms, refuses help, is not doing therapy, not doing DBT. I don't want to say people can't alleviate a lot of the symptoms, because apparently, there are successes, but I would hope that anyone that has experienced this, that watches this, hopefully it helps them recognize, it helps pull them out of the fog and take some sort of action to protect themselves. And they're going to have to figure out what that looks like for themselves, whether it's low contact or no contact. I don't know the best situation. If someone is being physically abusive and mentally abusive to some of the stuff that we see, I would hope that they put themselves in a situation where they never have to experience that. So yeah, I would hope that. Yes.
as you were saying, like you're not talking about minimal symptoms of passive aggressiveness. You're talking about not talking about slightly narcissist. You're talking about
Yes.
someone who has these really on the end of the spectrum. I was wondering how often this happens because I've heard, segments on NPR about no contact, and I've read popular articles just in the past over the years. And so I looked up, I guess a study in 2020 by YouGov said that 1 in 4 Americans are estranged from immediate family members. So
Yeah.
this no contact, did you have any idea how prevalent this was?
No, no, not until literally I really didn't. I didn't until I pretty much posted the trailer on TikTok and the engagement and the comments and it struck a nerve. No, I was trying to authentically tell a story, and I agree with you. Like it is up to the viewer to kind of decide what happens, and what she's doing in terms of whether she is at the end going no contact or not, Um, uh, yeah, I didn't know. No, I was just trying to I was just trying to tell a story from an authentic place, and what would this character do, and just be honest. So, yeah, it has been a surprise.
Every creator, especially when they spend months and years creating something, gets changed by the creation process. Often they learn something about themselves. I've written books, I've done blogs and podcasts. I know intimately that I change when I create things. How do you think this movie changed you? What did you learn about yourself?
Ooh, good question. Good question. I would say, I mean, there's a couple different levels. I know what I gained as a filmmaker, like in terms of the craft of filmmaking. And I this was my second feature, and I gained just a lot of filmmaking skill, just in terms of just by doing it more and having stuff go wrong and having stuff go right. And I don't want to get too into the craft, but I'm better with sound now. I had to completely figure, and we can talk about finance later, but we had some money fall through right before we started. And my brother and and we were already in pre-production. We already had the majority of the cast. And so we had to reconfigure the budget, and we're like, okay, I guess we're gonna have to figure out sound, and I had a good shotgun mic, but just figuring out those things, that was not a skill I had before. And I did most of the sound on the movie most days. And so now that would be a skill I have. Telling a story, structure, etc. In terms of on my I think I kind of already had this, but it just kind of reiterated to me, just really going in. Is like, you don't know what other people are going through. You know, you don't know the wars people are battling internally. And so having empathy for people, I do, having empathy for the mother, even though you see the behavior, because God knows what happened to her to create that, and this family socioeconomically has it, they're well off, it's a nice house. They're not struggling, but guess what? You would not want to live in that house. There's hell from experiences, the lead character, Jane, not very likable, but guess what? Her dad just died, and she had a lot of abuse as a child that she's just starting to parse through. I would say that's it, is just more empathy for humans. Yeah.
A few thoughts based on that. One is I definitely appreciated the audio. I noticed specifically when I was listening to, and now that you mentioned Garden State, because the Garden State soundtrack is fantastic and so well done. Um, I definitely catch exactly what you're talking about. Specifically, the music was well chosen and placed very well. Let's talk about the budget. This is a financial podcast. I've interviewed a number of filmmakers, and the way they fund their films really varies, right? Because a big problem that everyone comes
Yes.
up with is, if I'm a blockbuster filmmaker, finding the money's not as hard. If I am trying to break into filmmaking or I'm at the beginning of it, finding the money is exceedingly hard. How did you fund this project?
I self-financed. This is not the type of project that would get money. I initially did write it as I was writing it because I was like, oh, second feature. I come from I initially, because I have a stand-up comedy background, I kind of was like being like, all right, I have friends who are friends with Amy Schumer. Let me write this script and maybe I can get it to her and I can get this thing made on a higher level. As I was writing it, I did start to picture Amanda more, which is a very different kind of vibe than and Amanda. I just kept picturing Amanda, and then I also was like, I can try and get funding for 2 years, or I can just make this thing now and get better. I'm a big self-finance guy, and it's a whole. I could tell you, it's a challenge. It's really, really a challenge. My brother and I got that money specifically by selling solar, which is we sold residential solar, and our whole game plan when he came out of, we were planning on scaling up a solar company to scale up a production company and just be making these micro, but a lot, 3 to 5 micro budget features a year. But the solar industry is horrendous. Yeah.
What does that budget look like if you're willing to talk about it? Like,
Yeah,
what
I
does
can
it
talk about it.
cost to
It
make a
was
film like
all
that?
said and done like 20,000 ish. Yeah, roughly. You stop kind of keeping track at a certain point. Like, but yeah, that's rough estimate what that was, that cost.
I
Yeah.
I was recently listening to Terry Gross on NPR interviewing Spike Lee, and he was talking about his first movie, She's Gotta Have It. And he kind of said, I hate acting, but I was one of the main characters because I just couldn't afford
Yes.
I couldn't afford
Yes.
to hire anyone else. And
Yes.
he said, finally when I got commercial success, I cut it. I didn't want to act anymore. Do you like acting? Because I noticed that you do play. Funny enough, you have one of the most likable characters in the whole movie. Although you've been, cheated on by your wife who left you, you're kind of jobless and working a coffee shop.
Yeah.
Again, trying to build empathy for these characters. There were definitely some fatal flaws in that character too, but was one of the more likable characters, I'd say, in the show.
I appreciate that. And I was trying to not just have doom and gloom,
Mhm. There
and
was
it
some of that
is
comedy
money.
background coming out. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and money. Why? I mean, yeah, a little because I mean, look, it's a very small. The last movie I made had a lot of. I didn't know what I was doing, right? And so we had so many actors and we had so many locations, and it was just insanity, like what we went through. But it feels much bigger than what the budget was for like a micro. But because you have New York City, you have 40 actors, 50 locations. So I wanted to make something smaller. I didn't want it to just be the family talking in rooms about a death and a script and that. So I tried to like have energy shifts in the movie. So I tried to keep the running time low. It's 72
Yeah,
minutes. You're
70
in and
minutes.
out.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not belabored. And I tried to have energy shifts so that it wasn't just a boring mother-daughter. So you have every whatever, starts in New York, goes to undisclosed location. I come in and it's just a different energy. Goes back to the house. I'm back in, different energy. Yeah.
And these actors, I mean, these are actors who've done other, Broadway films.
Yeah.
These are accomplished actors, but I imagine pretty much they either volunteered or did this to build up their own resumes as opposed to saying, boy, I'm going to make a lot of money on this.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, they were paid, but it was at scale for this. It was a SAG. It was SAG. Yeah, it was SAG. They have a micro budget agreement. I mean, the woman who plays the mother is
Yeah,
yeah, I mean,
I recognize her. I've seen her
she's
in
legit. Yeah,
TV.
yeah.
Yeah, I've seen her
Kathleen
on TV
McNenny.
before.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like
We were lucky to get her. I mean, she went to Juilliard. She's on faculty at Juilliard. She's been on Broadway. She's been in a million TV shows. She's very, very good. Yeah.
I've interviewed some filmmakers and it runs the gamut, right? So some went to film school, kind of started out traditionally, et cetera. And then others were into something else and either made a documentary about that thing or got into filmmaking after doing something else. Maybe like you who did comedy first.
Mhm.
There may be some people out here listening to this podcast right now who are saying, boy, that's something I would like to do, whether it's a documentary and they have something they want to cover, something they know about, or even want to go more kind of on the other side and do something that's fictional. How does a person who didn't come up in the film industry end up in film?
So I knew when I started stand up with kind of the idea. I mean, I started stand up in like the first time I ever went on a stage was 2007, right? And moved to New York in 2008. So it was kind of pre-podcasts. And so there was no information of like how to get into movies and TV. Like it was like, okay, the people I loved started as stand-ups, right? So I was like, okay, I'll move to New York. You know, I love Seinfeld. I loved Adam Sandler. And I loved movies too. I grew up just loving movies, but that wasn't really on the radar. It was like comedy and then maybe an actor and like and a writer, you know, and then doing stand up. I loved stand up, but after 5 years, I had a friend who ended up having a show on MTV, comedian Derek Gaines. And we MTV was interested in him, and so we started being able to pitch to them and writing stuff. And I didn't like that experience of like writing stuff that didn't get made. And then I'm like, okay, I'm gonna make something. So I self-financed a pilot. I self-financed a pilot in like 2015 that I thought was gonna come out perfect. You know, this is gonna be Seinfeld. It's gonna be great. And it came out very, very, very mediocre, right?
Hmm.
And it was like it was not bad, but it was not good, and it just and then I didn't direct it. I wrote it, and there were things I could. The guy who directed it, who was a good friend of mine, a comedian, Grant Gordon, did a great job, and I couldn't did a better job than I could have. But there were certain things that we had written that didn't come out the way that I thought were that, and I'm like, oh, like I need to learn how to direct. And so that then and I loved like the Joe Swanberg mumblecore movies where it's just like he just basically got a camera and just started running, you know, filming. And the Duplass brothers, like I was listening to them and they were all about like story and performance and don't worry about everything else. So my first movie very much was just I didn't know what I was doing, and it was just I wanted to I had like I had a script and these scenes. And by the way, we haven't really talked about those, but I should note is like Fog was every scene was the majority of everything was improvised besides the first scene, FYI. So I will have that's how I work. It's kind of a cheat code for performances is I will have an outline of all the beats of the scenes. And we're very clear as to like what has to happen in the scenes, right? But then you end up with these very naturalistic performances because it's the characters knowing their roles, knowing what has to happen, and then I'll be on the side steering it too, saying, you know, I'll throw in lines a lot and I'll throw, you know, I'll kind of write on the spot. But that's it. Yeah, I just, you know, that's how I kind of learned filmmaking and got into it, was just kind of jumping in the pool and sink or swim, you know. That's kind of how that happened.
In
Uh,
my intro, I mentioned this idea a little bit of financial independence. And so my community is very much into making enough money so you pretty much can do what you want in life. And in fact, a lot of ways I define financial independence is not a specific number or not even having enough money to fund the rest of your life, but figuring out your finances enough so you can spend as much time doing those things that are deeply important to you as possible. And so when I talk about this, I often break it down into three possible paths, right? One is to really work hard at something that you're good at that maybe you like, maybe you don't like, but you're trying to get done as fast as possible, make as much money as possible so you can get out. That's one path. The next path is trying to do kind of side hustles or build passive income in the side so you can do what you want. Maybe you own some real estate, maybe you create some content that makes money, but you're pretty much doing that in service to freeing up your time so you can do other things. And last but not least, the last way I talk about getting to financial independence is what I call the passion play, which means find something you love and find a way to get that to take up most of your time and yet still at least either provide for you financially or allows you at least to be okay. You definitely seem like you're more on the passion play side. This idea of let's bring in the life we want today and not wait till we're at some place financially. Does it feel like it's working out for you? Like, does this feel like a
no,
joyful way to go about things? No,
no, I'm
no.
making jokes. I'm making jokes. Uh It has been, I mean, listen, this is a finance. I'm happy to talk finances. It it has been very, very, I mean, I'm very glad I've done it this way. You're right. I have done the passion play. I do at times will regret it just because it can be a grind financially sometimes, and it can be stressful. And I've made certain decisions. I mean, the whole solar thing has been, the past 4 years of my life has I've been involved, and there's been different things that have gone wrong. And that that has just really caused chaos, if I'm being honest with you, but at the same time, like, I wouldn't have two movies done right now, and so there's I've kind of been all in, moving to New York, all in on stand up, all in on production, and I'm hoping that in the next, moving forward, that it is, I've also made decisions to not be pursuing Hollywood. I have a good network, and I'm not trying to get a writing job. I'm not, I've made a decision of I'm going to make what I'm going to make, finances be damned. That day may be ending soon. You know what I mean? Like, I have a couple more projects I want to do, and then I may have to just try and get writing jobs, or do, just because you can pay a price for it, if that makes sense. Does that answer your question?
It does.
Okay.
So, Alex, I want to thank you for being on the show today. As I think of our conversation, I guess what it comes down to is nuance. And I think a lot about the nuance in your film, Fog, this idea that no one is specifically right or wrong. And these are difficult situations where sometimes the answer isn't clear. And I think we can also translate that a little bit into our financial pathways. In fact, do you front load the sacrifice and do stuff you don't like to make money? Do you push that all aside and go for the passion play, but then have to deal with the fallout of sometimes not having enough money to do what you want to do? The answers aren't clear. And in a sense, it's a different kind of fog that I feel like we all have to find our way through. On the other hand, I think that journey, unlike in the movie, that journey can be much more joyful. Like we can decide when it's time to work hard, make money, and maybe put certain things aside. And then we can decide when to say, you know what, finances be damned. I have this calling to do this thing, and I'm going to do it. I want to end this episode the way I end every episode by asking if people are interested in this wonderful movie, what is the easiest way for them to watch it?
Tubi. Yeah, it's free on Tubi. You can rent it on Prime Video, but watch it for free. It's fine by me. And it's hard. The algorithm is not nice to us on Prime Video, if that's where you're looking for it. Like, you're gonna have to search Fog Alex Anderson for it to come up. Yeah.
Well, Alex Anderson, thank you so much for being on Earn and Invest today.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate the time you put in.
That's a wrap. All right, I leave things running just for a few minutes to just catch whatever after show we have, whatever we talk about.
Cool.
Yeah, I really like the movie. I thought you handled the nuance expertly. Um, and I guess, I don't want to ruin the movie for anyone who might go
It's
watch
tricky.
it
Yeah. Yeah.
afterwards. But I will tell you one thing that I'd love to talk about, maybe in a sense, off mic.
Yeah.
You decided to slow roll some of it and then have kind of an explosive moment in the film, which kind of reorients us. I think towards the end gets us to rethink where we really are. It gets us to think of the characters differently. Did you know that was coming from the beginning? Were you like, I'm going to slow roll this and then bam, I'm going to hit him with it? Or was that something that organically built as you were making the movie?
That was one of the original intentions. Once the idea came to me of, like, to make the mother have a personality. Once we were dealing with
Yeah, to make
abuse
her
and how
likable. Yeah, to
exactly.
make her likable, especially
Yes.
likable to outside world. And we all know, like, so I
Yes.
do know someone in this situation. And what does everyone say about this person's mother? Oh, I
Love it.
love your mom. I love your mom.
That's it. Yeah. So that was by design. That was by design. And again, some people think nothing is happening. Other people, they recognize what is happening, and there's a bit of a slow burn. And then and some people kind of sense something is going to happen. No one really expects it to be that level, you
Hmm.
know. That's kind of like, no one is expecting that. But yeah, a lot of people don't know that, and that's what I wanted to happen, because it's like you just don't know as you're going through, you don't know what's going to set someone off like this, you know.
The other thing that I think really worked in this movie, and again, I'm not a critic, this is just someone who watched it
No,
and
no,
enjoyed it.
I love,
Um,
listen.
the other thing I thought was really amazing is the movie consistently pulled out my emotions, even from the beginning.
Yeah.
Like, again, whether it was annoyance with the main character, whether it was waiting on eggshells to see what the mother was going to say and was she going to cross the line. Um, I felt like I consistently was feeling something through most of the movie.
Yeah. It's
Um,
awesome.
yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's where, look, the actors were legit, and you feel their performances, right? It feels authentic. The music helps with that, the music,
Yeah.
and I'm glad you
Again,
noticed. I put a lot. That's one of my biggest gripes with indie films is a lot of times that's where they'll skimp on budget,
yeah,
and you,
the music told some of the story.
yes.
Like you didn't. So I guess what I'd say is a lot of people, I imagine, forget that that element can be a major storyteller too. Yeah,
Mm.
and affect the emotions and just bring out like there's nothing like music to like bring out your emotions quickly.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It adds, it's gonna make you feel. It's gonna help enhance I'm thank you for what I appreciate you saying that it made you feel.
Tell me about what it felt like when people started noticing it on TikTok.
I mean, it was rewarding because you're just working in like this black hole, and it's just like, oh my goodness, like the because I mean, when you don't have movie stars and you don't have this didn't get into any film festivals, and so it's like, okay, well, I guess it's a self-release and there's no movie, so it's just gonna be, it's just gonna be outreach and grinding an audience. And I do think over the course of time, that this will it's been getting good word of mouth, and therapists have really responded to this. They
Yeah, I
can't
could I could see
believe.
that. I could see
Yeah,
that.
therapists can't believe they're like, oh my goodness, and they're, for people kind of go, I do think this will be a tool for people going through this that haven't identified. And so yeah, it was rewarding. Just you're working in a black hole and you're like, no one's gonna see this, but yeah. That's
Did you get out of this what you wanted to? So obviously we all come to creation with different purposes, different hopes. You're kind of on the other side of that. Now, again, whenever you write a book, probably make a movie, I mean, you're never at the end, right? Because hopefully you're marketing it still and it's getting out to people. But
mm.
kind of looking back, what do you feel like you got out of this and was it what you wanted?
I did because I mean, listen, I wanted to tell this story, right? And we told it. We set out on a mission, and you have this big crazy goal of like, yeah, we're going to make a movie with limited resources, and we climb that mountain. And as you probably know, I mean, there's no reward on the mountain. Even if this had gotten into Cannes, it really is like you set a big goal, you're pursuing it. So for that time, I'm super close with the actors. We became, I mean, with such a
Yeah.
raw emotional move. We were friends before, but it's like a deep friendship now, and you, so you have that adventure of we all went on a movie. And on a secondary and then the fact that it's resonating with people is just like even better. And it's like, yeah, people, it's helping, you get messages, you're helping people's lives, that's rewarding. Like it's like, my life is enriched because of this. So that's, and then on a more practical level, like I needed to improve as a filmmaker, like I had only made one movie, right? And so I got much better, and you always got to keep improving, and I need to keep, but it's like I can make the things I want to make now, so yeah.
All right, I'm going to cut this.